Well, I'm your teacher this morning, for better or for worse. So we kind of had the perfect storm today. So from the AV equipment to classes to preaching. So John and Carmen are gone. Fernando and Rosa are gone on vacation. Hunter was going to be kind of our backup back there. He's gone. He and Jeremy are gone for work for a couple of weeks. Charles and Diane, I think, are at a family reunion, I think, on Diane's side. Doug and Nancy are in South Texas. And we get a text this morning, Burley and Doug and some of us got a text this morning that Park is sick. So Park must really be sick not to be here. Anyway, so you're getting not the A or the B or the C or the D or the E or the F team. It's somewhere further down the alphabet this morning. But we'll get through it. We'll get through it. But Burley's going to preach, so we know we'll get a good lesson during the worship hour anyway.
What's going on?
Well, everybody's gone or sick, so I'm teaching the class.
Is that right?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It'll be great. Did I read something in the bulletin about you going on a trip?
I don't know. We've been on one, and we'll go on one later, but I thought what I would do.
Is the preacher sick?
He is. He is.
When he hears your lesson, he might.
Yeah, he might magically show up. He might magically show up. So I've been teaching the young adult class with, I guess basically it's Hunter, Jeremy, Emma, and Brooke and Logan when they're there. It's a study for new Christians, but we're kind of going, it starts through the Old Testament and gives you different ways of how to actually study the Bible. And there's one particular set of lessons in here that I really like. And this is going to be Old Testament related, but it gives you a way to study the Old Testament by character. So what it does is it breaks down the Old Testament and gives you like a main character. And then with each character, and this is in chronological order as well, but with each character it gives you additional people associated with that character. And then kind of, the events that happened around that character. And I thought, well, this is a pretty cool way. I'd never really thought about outlining the Old Testament by character. But it kind of starts out, so who would the first main character in the Old Testament be? It's pretty easy. This one's easy. First man on the earth, Adam, right? Adam's the main character. Of course, we know the main events that happened with Adam, the whole garden, the fall of man, so on and so forth. But additional characters with Adam, that we would remember associated with Adam would be Eve, a couple of other main ones. Cain and Abel, there you go. So that kind of starts it off. So first main character, Adam, you get the associated people with Adam, the events, Cain killing Abel, they're evicted from the garden, so to speak, so on and so forth. Well, then you go on through the Old Testament, and y'all will kind of get this as we go, but, they're evicted from the garden and mankind begins to expand. Well, then who becomes our next main character in the Old Testament after Adam? Noah. Yeah, it seems like that's a long way off, but really it's Noah. Of course, we know associated with people with Noah. One would be Mrs. Noah. Of course, his 3 kids and their wives. And of course, the main event would be what? The flood. So that's taking us through Noah. Well, they, after the flood, they land and, begin to repopulate the earth and somewhere after Noah, the Tower of Babel, how the peoples came together and determined to build the tower into heaven. And God dispersed them and scrambled their speech or whatever, which to me has always been an interesting story. So it doesn't really say they did anything wrong there. It just said they wanted to build a tower to heaven. Now, why would God come in there and scramble their speech and disperse them? It's just a question. I don't necessarily know the answer.
That's not how you're supposed to get to heaven.
Yeah, see, I wonder too, like Jerry said about the motive. Maybe they're starting to think a little more highly of themselves, like we can actually do this. Like we're so important, we can build a tower and get right up there to God. I don't know. It's interesting thought.
Yeah, doesn't the scripture say something like, if God had not stopped them, who knows what they could
Yeah,
have
something to that effect. Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Very egotistical instead of God-centered.
Yes. Yes, I think so.
And I think it's not just they were building it, but they were building out of their own power.
Yeah.
See what they can do besides God. 'Cause God
Kind of proud of themselves.
has to do what they do, but they were going off to do what they think they want to do.
You know, and I think if you extrapolate that to current times, boy, does that make you wonder about our society today, the things that we try to do and are doing.
And then also, the Bible says evil came to them. So everything they were doing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it goes back to really what you said. I mean, it starts right here, doesn't it? It starts with what they've purposed in their hearts.
I think God thought if they continued on, there would be no limit to their unrestrained rebellion against Him. Because
Right.
everything was just man-centered.
Right. Like I don't know that I believe they really could have built a tower to heaven. I don't think that was possible, but I think it's what you said, that had he allowed that to continue, who knows what else, where else that would have wound up going. No.
That would be like saying, they can hold up the whole world.
Right.
So
Right.
why would they,
Right.
think they can build? They'll continue to build because you got man still trying to figure out how to get here and how to get.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
When you start putting yourself above God, you're thinking more highly of yourself, and they didn't have no respect. When
Yep.
you get high-minded, you have no respect for anything because you think more than what you are.
All right. So we've gone from Adam, we've gone to Noah. We know the associated characters and events. Basically, y'all have been through this. I'm doing this lesson on how to outline the Bible by character. So we got Adam. We know the associated characters. We know the main events that happened with those characters. We're up to Noah. We know about Noah's family and kind of the main events there. So we're through Noah. The flood's over. The population has been expanded around. Who comes along next in the Bible? Who? Abram. And what do we know about Abram at the time, Abram? Well, he was a good guy, apparently. God counted him righteous. What's the first thing we know about him? He's living life. He's got his family and his herds and all that. Where does Abram live? He lives, what, Ur? But what's the first thing God tells him to do? Pick up your stuff. Got a better place for you. And so he does. He does. I mean, I don't read anywhere in there where he says, God, are you serious? It's like we're pretty settled here. Things are going pretty good. I don't read that anywhere. He actually did what God asked him to do. And where's he headed? Where's Abram headed? Canaan. Yeah, Canaan, which is where that first comes into play. So along the journey, Abram's got his family, he's got his son, which is another character, an associated character with Abram. Somewhere along there, he changes his name to Abraham. But who's a main character or an additional character there with Abraham? Sarah is, for sure. They've got a son, Isaac. So what happens there? They're along the journey, headed to a place Abraham has no idea where it is, just that God's showing him where it is. And what does God ask Abraham to do? Sacrifice his son. which that's a whole lesson unto its own right there. Speaking of a man of righteousness, it didn't really say that he questioned it. He just said, okay, if that's what you want, there's got to be a reason. Yeah.
I got a question. Can we relate all these things, this generational movement or whatever that is going on, can we relate it to Genesis 3:15?
Well, that's kind of, right, that's the first messianic prophecy, as it's called, where I will bruise his head and I will bruise your heel and I will crush his head. Is that the passage you're referring to? Yeah, I mean, everything from this point is kind of part of God's plan, right? It doesn't all happen like that. But God goes on and establishes his own people. You go through the children of Israel and the trials and tribulations they had. It takes you up through the captivity and the New Testament times. And really, what is all of that? The old law as it's given. What is the purpose of all that? All those generations of people. What is the purpose of all that leading up to? It's leading up to Christ, right? Which was once and for all the answer. I heard a preacher one time describe the Bible. It's really pretty simple. In the beginning, God was with man. Man was with God in the garden, right? First man messed up right off the bat. And things went south. But God had a plan. It didn't unfold overnight. It didn't unfold in a month or a year. But everything, to your point, everything from that point forward leads us to what can save us. And so you have the beginning, God's with man. You have this plan as it unfolds all the way through the Old Testament into the New Testament. And then you end the Bible in the book of Revelation, and where's man? The righteous man. Where is he in the end? He's back reunited with God in heaven. So really, like to your point, yeah, everything that happens from the beginning in the garden to the end in Revelation is that plan of reconciling man to be back with God. That's it.
He comes to not destroy that which he had brought forth, but to redeem it back. Because in the beginning, he knew man was going to have failure from the day in the garden.
Yep.
Because when Adam had got the revelation from God, what he can do, and then when his wife, after he had made and had, after the bone was removed, brought woman in, he explained to his wife what God had told him, that even though she had got, sidetracked by Satan, which caused man failure from that point on.
Yep. So that separated that sin, that initial sin. What does sin do? It separates man from God, right? It puts up that barrier, and we needed something to take it down.
And that's been the downfall ever since. To see
Yep.
the Bible, this is a point, but that's why blood and water is significant to bringing us up to this
Yep.
point.
But to your point, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Everything starts from that point, and everything that happens in succession is a way to reconcile man back to God and overcome Satan. All right, so we've got Adam, we've got Noah, we get Abraham. And we talked about some of the people with Abraham. Lot was another one. It was kind of an associated character with Abraham. And we know about Lot and what happened with Sodom and Gomorrah, and you mentioned that earlier, Jerry.
In that particular era, God repented he ever made.
Yeah, how does he feel today? But another main character comes along after Abraham, and you could argue about this one. I mean, there's all kinds of main characters, but, Abraham's, basically his grandson is Jacob, right? Which Jacob later is called who? Israel, right? How many sons did Jacob have? 12. Okay. So you have that. So you have Jacob, and we all know the story of Joseph. And Joseph is the next main character as it lays out here in this study guide. What do we know about Joseph? What happened to Joseph early on? Should have been killed, right? All of his brothers, except for one, really wanted to kill him. But luckily there was one. Who was the one that didn't? Yeah, I think it was Reuben. He was the oldest too, wasn't he? Wasn't Reuben the oldest? Took him out of the pit, and of course Joseph had his special little jacket his mother made him. That, of course, the brothers didn't like him for that. But Reuben takes him out, right? And he takes the blood of an animal and puts it on the coat and says, "Oh, an animal killed him, and here's his jacket." And of course, but he's sold into slavery. And what a great story that is, right? So, sold into slavery. Well, of course, we know the story of Joseph, how he rises to power in Egypt. And then wouldn't you know, the family there runs into trouble, during the famine. And where do they go? They go to Egypt. Well, how come Egypt had so much food in store? Well, Joseph had interpreted those dreams, right? And told them they were going to be years, gave them a heads up, said, "Hey, this is coming. Start storing up food." So they did. And wouldn't you know, ironically, that Joseph's family was starving over there where they were, and they knew Egypt had food, so they had to go beg for food from Egypt. Yeah.
I've been thinking about all this I'm glad you're bringing all this so I can voice myself out a little bit, see if what I'm thinking is right. Joseph's situation, I link it to Jesus. Joseph did nothing, but they did everything to put him off. However, Jesus did nothing, but then they did everything, but it's become the rejected stone. Has now become the people stone.
Right.
What's going on? Can I think it like that way?
I don't see why not. Like you said, they did everything to get rid of Joseph. And but yet, God used him. And to your point, Jesus was the cornerstone, the stone that men rejected, but yet becomes the author and the finisher of our salvation, right? No man comes to the Father but by Jesus. So I think that's a great correlation. And isn't that the kind of the cool thing in some of these old stories? You find those little hidden thoughts in there. Just all of these stories are just amazing. It's really been fun going through this book. We're going through the characters, Emma, of how to outline the Old Testament as you're familiar with. But the stories are just amazing. When you go back, and we mostly know all these stories, it's just kind of fun to... It is, I think it's a great way to outline the Old Testament, but just going back through all these stories and picking up little nuggets like what you're talking about is tremendous. But of course, Joseph, rises to power, saves his people. So the whole family moves to Egypt, right? Which they end up staying there for quite some time. So what happens? So for a period of, I don't know, at least a couple of generations, I think, the people are happy. Everything's going well in Egypt. But what happens one day? One day there's a Pharaoh that rises to power, and the Bible says he doesn't remember Joseph. And he kind of looks around and he's like, wow, we got a lot of these people that are not Egyptian that if they took a mind to, they could really do some damage here in Egypt. So what does he do? He enslaves them all. So you go through that for a while, and then that leads us to our next main character, Moses. What do we know about Moses and people associated with Moses? Who was Moses' brother? Aaron, right? You know, Moses told God, said, well, I can't speak very well, so I'm going to need some help. He's like, well, your brother can. All right. Takes that excuse away, doesn't he? This says his father-in-law Jethro is another associated character. But of course, you know, we know all the stories of Moses. Pharaoh decides to kill all the firstborn Egyptians. And isn't it ironic? It's another one of those stories. So his mother puts him in that basket and floats him down the river. And of course, Pharaoh's daughter finds him. Well, they need a nursemaid for him. Wonder who they found to do that. Sister and his mother come right back into the picture. I mean, how amazing is that? Anyway, stories of Moses are great. You know, the burning bush, we know about that. And of course, he leads the people out. And of course, with Moses, we associate all the wanderings in the wilderness. A lot of great stories there. I won't go into all of them, but we know those. You know, the crossing the Red Sea and the manna in the desert and water coming from a rock. Boy, you know, yeah, you talk about some of these things you associate with. You know, I always look at the children of Israel and I'm like, you know, they've seen these amazing miracles. I mean, you're on the banks of the Red Sea and you see the Egyptian army coming after you. And you got nowhere to go. And somehow God causes these waters to part. You go across, the Egyptian army comes in. You witness that. You walk through the Red Sea, walled on either side of you. You personally walk through that. And then just a short time later, after you've seen this thing, you're still grumbling.
Well, that's what I was saying. You know, before they even got there, when they got to the Red Sea, it was all a lot of bickering and rebellion.
Well, Moses brought them there to die, right? Isn't that what they said? Moses, we've left and you brought us here to die.
But see, they had a bad mindset from the beginning, because when they was going, they was complaining all the way up because everything that was going was not going in their favor.
Well, that's kind of my point. So I read these stories and I think, man, I wouldn't be like that. I mean, I've just witnessed these great things, and then they turn around and start complaining. But is that really true? Do we do the same thing? I mean, we didn't see it personally, but it's in here, and we believe this is true. So we know these things happened. It's like, man, wish I had a nicer car. I mean, I'm stuck with this thing, or whatever the case may be. I mean, do we do that? Because are we really different from the children of Israel? You know, Jerry, just you and I talking earlier, you know, we complain about whatever's going on in our lives. It's like, man, I can't believe this happened, or I can't believe that's happening. But some of the things you see on a daily basis, you know, working in disaster relief and all that stuff, kind of makes you appreciate what you have, I'm sure. As bad as I may have it, as bad as you may have it, I mean, there's somebody else out there that's got it way worse than you do, and yet somehow they make it through. And in that, when you get through those, I'll call them valleys, when you get through those situations and you look back 5, 10 years later and you're like, man, I don't really know how we got through that, but we did. What should that do? It should, shouldn't it, right? It should bring you closer to God, and you should be thankful for that. But the next time something happens, some hiccup in the road comes along, should be a little stronger, right? Should have a little more faith. Should have a little more comfort, knowing that, man, I got through that last situation. God sure did help me.
But they still grumble.
But yet we still grumble. Anyway, that's Moses. Of course, Moses leads them where? What was the promised land? Canaan, right? Somebody's been there before, haven't they? Yeah. So not everybody made it to the promised land, probably because of all that grumbling. Who else didn't get to go in the promised land? Moses himself didn't. But God did take him up on that mountain and show him the promised land. So that leads us to our next main character. So who does Moses appoint to take over the children of Israel? Joshua. So he gives Joshua a lot of instructions. Who are some additional people that we can associate with Joshua? I know the first one that comes to my mind. This is even before they go in and start conquering it, but Moses sent out 12 spies, didn't he? Right? 10 of them came back and said, nah, we got to get out of here. Can't do this. But two of them said, piece of cake, we got this. Joshua was one of them. Caleb was the other one. So that's somebody, the first one I associate with Joshua. This book says Eleazar, who was Aaron's son, that succeeded Aaron as the high priest. But there was one lady, when they're in the city of Jericho, the spies are in there, and they find out they're in there and they're going to come get them or whatever. There's a lady that helps them escape. Rahab. What do we know about Rahab? Was she a woman of high repute? No, she was a prostitute, I think it says. But she also gets saved when they destroy Jericho later on, right? They save Rahab and her house. All right, so Joshua's now in control. They've gone in, and they've destroyed Jericho. There's that one little city, Ai, I think it's called, or something like that, where they decide to kind of do it their way, and they stumble and get beat in that little skirmish, and then they come back and they're like, okay, God, what do you want us to do? And so they do, and they go back. Anyway, they conquer Canaan, and each tribe, each of those sons of Jacob or Israel, each tribe has their own specific area, right? And basically, for a while there, I guess would you call it tribal government? Because each tribe kind of minds its own business, is in charge of its own self. That doesn't go particularly well, as we might presume, because nothing else has up to this point. So God's going to establish some people to I kind of think of it as like the tribes are state government, but they need a federal government to keep them in line. That may be good or bad. But anyway, so who are these people that God starts appointing to kind of help the tribes out? Are they kings? Judges. Right, we're not to the kings yet. Yeah, so this one lists Gideon as a main person, but man, there's so many judges, right? I mean, you talked about Deborah. I mean, who are some other ones, some people that you could list along with Gideon? Who? Absolutely. Samson is one of the first ones that comes to my mind. And you mentioned Deborah, and you could, Ruth comes along in this time period. I mean, there's a lot of really cool stories. If you just say judges, I don't remember exactly how many judges there were. But some just incredible stories along through there of these judges. I mean, you mentioned Samson. I mean, there's some incredible stories about Samson. Who was the last judge? He's actually our next person in this. Who? Yeah, Samuel. What do we know about Samuel? Let me start this way. He's the last one. Some additional people with Samuel. His mother, Hannah, which what do we know about that story? She wanted a son and wasn't having one, and she told God, if you will give me a son, I'll give him to you. So what did she do? She gave him to Eli, the priest, right? So Samson was raised with Eli there in the temple. So Samuel goes along, and people start grumbling again. What are they grumbling about? What do they want? What do the people want? They want a king. How come? How come they think they want a king?
Well, didn't they also complain about Samuel's sons?
They did, and they weren't very good. His sons were not very good. What were his sons' names? But they were wicked. So they're complaining because a lot of these people around them had their own kings, right? Which leads me to a question. So as they're conquering Canaan, as they're taking control, they really didn't eradicate all the people, did they? Had they done that? Would there have been other foreign people around them that had their own kings? Had they really? Well, it'd probably be less chaos if they had really driven those people from the land. Instead, they've got all these influences around them, right?
Well, like you said, again, it's God's plan. So he has a route that they're going through. And though I don't think they ended up that long on it, but God has a plan that is taking them to Canaan. So all the others were still there, but Canaan was the destination. However, God wanted, like where we are now, he's going to use them to show the other people who he is. So
True.
it's
True. And as they're conquering, some of those places they're conquering, they're scared of them, right? Because they've seen like what they did in Jericho and some of these other places. But had they totally driven those people out and really taken control, then there probably wouldn't even have been any kings around there for the people to see. But once again, they're like, well, hey, those guys over there got a king. They got a king. How come we don't have a king? We need a king. Does God just say, okay, yeah, you're right, you need one? No, I don't think God said that. God said, no, you don't know what you're asking for. Samuel told them, no, you don't need one, but they kept grumbling, kept saying they did, so God says, all right. So who does Samuel find to anoint as the first king? Which leads us to the next person in this outline. Saul, right? He looked the part, didn't he? He was tall. Bible says he was tall, handsome man. He looked like a king. He looked like one. Not sure he acted much like one. So who are some people around Saul that we can remember? The first one I think of is his son, one of his sons. Jonathan. Of course, there's a young man growing up during this time frame that actually is best friends with Jonathan. What's this young man's name? David. David's a great warrior, isn't he? He leads them on many conquests, conquers all kinds and wins all kinds of battles. And Saul's pretty happy about it, right? Man, I got this good guy working for me and everything's great. Is that what happens? No. Jealousy. Kind of back to what started all this, the people there grumbling because they didn't have a king. Be like everybody else. I want what somebody else has. So how does David come along? What happens? So Saul's the king. Samuel's still around. What does God tell Samuel who the next king's going to be? He says, go where? To the house of who? Jesse. What a funny story this is, right? So Samuel goes to Jesse's house, says, get your sons in here, let me check them out. And he's got a bunch of them. So he starts looking at it, he's like, no, not that one. No, not that one. Oh, that big handsome guy over there? No, not that guy. He looks at Jesse and says, is that all your sons? Have we made a mistake here? Jesse's like, oh, my youngest son's out there tending the sheep or whatever. He says, well, get him up here. And sure enough, that's him. Isn't that an ironic story? The one that they overlooked was like, no, it couldn't be him. So David, of course, I mean, we could go through all the stories about Saul and David and, Saul's jealousy and trying to kill David and so on and so forth. And David survives all that, becomes king, right? Now, David was a great king, right? David was the king of all kings of what I would call the Israelites. Who are some people we associate with David? Just that we're, contemporary with David. What starts out, the first one that comes to my mind, David goes to see his sons who were his brothers. His dad sends him to take his brother some food right there in the army, and they're fighting the Philistines. So David gets there, and there's this big standoff, right? Saul's the king. He's supposed to be the big warrior king guy, and the Israelites are scared to death of the Philistines. How come? Goliath. So what does David do? David goes out there and kills the giant. Saul tries to dress him up in all of his armor, and you can just imagine a little boy trying to put all that stuff on, and so, he can't even move or whatever. David says, "No, I can't do that." Anyway, he takes his stone and kills him in the head and chops off his head with Goliath's own sword. Anyway, so David becomes king. What's another big story we remember about David? This just shows his flaws. So David was a great guy, man after God's own heart, right? But was he perfect? Not by a long shot. He was sightseeing. So David and Bathsheba, right? So David does that. He has Bathsheba's husband killed, sends him into the worst battle, and this is pretty bad stuff. And God sends Nathan. At this point, I guess Samuel's gone, but Nathan comes and tells him the story of the rich man. And rich man has friends and family coming to dinner, so he doesn't take one of his own flock. He goes and takes the sheep of that one poor guy over there, takes his lone family pet, so to speak. I'm transposing words here, and David's like, who would do that? That man needs to be punished. Who is it? And Nathan says, well, you're the guy. It's you. I'm talking about you. And David doesn't argue with him, does he? He pointed out David's sin, and David felt terrible about it. Is that the part that makes David after God's own heart? Is it because?
Well, I think you kind of make it too good on David's side. But, argue and even condemn whoever.
Exactly.
done that.
Exactly.
He didn't really think of himself before.
No, not until Nathan said, David, it's you I'm talking about. I mean, isn't that a funny story? My dad was like that, you know. He wouldn't just come out and say you did this, you know. He would torture you a little bit, my dad would, before he punished you. But isn't that it? I mean, Nathan tells him this great story. David, it's just, boy, I can see it. David's blood is boiling. Somebody in my kingdom's doing that? Who is it? I need to find out this guy. And Nathan says, it's you. That's what I'm talking about. But to David's credit, he felt bad about it, right? I mean, he did. And is it that repentant spirit, the repentant heart, is that what makes him a man after God's own heart? I'm asking.
I think we see several aspects of how God is showing, how David is showing God's heart, and one of them is his humility towards Saul, I think, and how he would not kill him. Most people, and his own fighting men thought he must be crazy, let him kill this man.
Exactly. Because he had opportunities.
He had opportunity. The kindness that he showed to Absalom.
Yeah.
Time and time again.
Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son that became handicapped, and David brought him into his house and had him taken care of. So yeah, he did have that. Now, he was a mighty warrior, for sure. But do you remember who played the harp and soothed Saul when Saul would have troubled nights and would feel awful? And remember who would come in and play the harp and sing songs? It was David. So, I mean, he had a lot of unique characteristics.
He did, but one thing about David, besides having Uriah killed, was at the end of his life, he told Solomon, make sure you take care of Joab for me. It's like he died with a sense of revenge in his heart, and that's always I love it.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's many, many facets to David. Well, I won't keep going. It takes us to the next person in the series, who was David's son that ruled after him. Solomon. Anyway, I think it's about time for us to stop here, so I won't keep going. But it's a pretty interesting way to look at the Old Testament. I like breaking it down by character, because it gets you through the Old Testament chronologically, but you also pick up all these additional people and the events that happened around those people, and it just takes you all the way through the Old Testament. I think out of all the lessons we've done, I really like this one a lot. Well, thank you for your comments. Once again, for those of you that just came in, this is not the A team or the B team or the C team or the D team. We're way down the list. We got a lot of people gone, and I guess Park is sick. So Burley's going to speak to us this morning, so at least we know we get a good lesson, whether class was any good or not. But thank you for your comments. I appreciate it.
Your preacher would be very proud of you today.
Thank you.